Okay, hello. It is Thursday, 23rd or Friday, 24th of May, depending on which part of the world you are. And this is the bi-weekly uh, user group meeting for BackdropCMS. And today we are going to discuss about DDev. How it usually goes is that we go around the room and we do some short introductions before the meeting. I'll start with myself. I'm Greg. I'm joining from Melbourne, Australia, and I'm interested in general in anything related to Backdrop in any way that I can help. And my day job is a support engineer for a Drupal hosting company, and that's it. Let's go with Luke.
Hi, folks. I am Luke McCormick, dialing in from San Ramon, California, soon to change to Martinez, California. Uh, I am a Drupal and Backdrop consultant and sometimes digital architect. And I'll move on to Martin.
Maybe during your introduction, say if you're using DDev or have. Go ahead.
I'm a longtime Lando user, but I've dallied in DDev for a while and I'm moving more towards it. So I'm interested in that. And generally I'm also looking to see how things like DDev coexist on the same platform as other Docker and non-Docker tools.
Right. And I've been a Lando user for like many, many years. And the reason for that is that we had a person in the community, in the Backdrop community, that was part of the company or the team that were developing Lando. So up until maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I was using Lando and I switched to DDev and I'm happy. I think it was Martin next.
I'm Martin. I'm a web developer in Northeast England, Yorkshire pudding around the Backdrop community. I've been using Lando for many years, mainly introduced by this community, and a lot of my kind of workflows quite heavily invested in Lando. So I'm quite interested in, particularly in people's journeys of moving from Lando to DDev and why and what are the positives, negatives, pitfalls. So if we now go to Jen.
Hello, Jen Lampton joining from Oakland, California. I've dabbled in DDev a little bit. Recently, I've started using it more for some of my bigger projects. I still haven't quite figured out how to use it in the community contribution workspace because my workflow is pretty specific to using symlinks, which don't work in DDev. But I have had a lot of success with some client projects. So here to hear all of the tips and tricks from everyone else who's been using it a little more.
I'm Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim in Deerwood, Minnesota. I am the last one, right? So particularly, well, Greg and maybe others, I was a longtime Lando user for the same reasons in the Backdrop community. Have been switching to DDev. Look, I kind of would say in the last 2 months, my switch is pretty complete. I haven't spun up a Lando site in about a month or two, but I had been dabbling in both for a while. The reason for my switch was primarily a couple of things, one of which was just that there's been a number of people that I work with have made the switch longer ago and have been using DDev, really happy with it. We don't have the same connection to Lando that we used to have, so I just felt like that. And I think what sort of finally pushed me over the edge was just that there was a fairly big update, I think, to Lando in the last several months, which it's not like I tried the update and had problems, but I just thought, well, why should I bother with this update if I'm really interested in going to DDev anyways? Like maybe now's the time to do it. So I just went ahead and then also I think also I was motivated by the fact that in the Drupal community there was actually a huge discussion going on and may still be going on, I don't know, about actually making sort of unofficially, I think, making DDev the official sort of support tool. I don't know, did I just say unofficially the official? Which doesn't make any sense, but the point being that they were sort of settling on, and the people from Lando even chimed in and said, Lando's here for a lot more than Drupal, and they didn't object to that discussion, and they saw the value in sort of having a tool. And I think, and I've been just hearing more and more people in our community talking about it. So that's what it is. Wilbur just joined us. Wilbur, we all just introduced ourselves. Do you want to just introduce yourself, and then we can talk about how we want to proceed today?
Yeah, my name's Wilbur Ince. I'm a developer in the Twin Cities. I use mostly Doxel, actually, which is the third variety of Docker environment, but we're looking seriously into getting into using DDev because it has some advantages, especially around hosting situations that use Nginx rather than just Apache, which is what Doxel is kind of based on. So with that, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'll just say in terms of structure of the discussion today, Wilbur was asked at the last minute to help out because I know he has looked a lot at the differences between these tools and really compared them, certainly more than I have. And I consider just to be more knowledgeable on stuff like these kinds of tools. Hey, Wilbur.
Yeah.
Calm down there. Anyways, we
just to say that
Yep.
for me personally, before we start with the extensive list
Sure.
of differences, I wasn't unhappy with Lando when I switched the main drive for switching it. So the previous company that I used to work for, again as a support engineer, was for the company that had the support for CMS, and we had another. We were using Ahoy, which is a tool that is open source and it's provided by Amazy, if I recall correctly. And I was using that in parallel with Lando. The main drive recently has been the fact that there was a request that has been lingering in the issue queue for Lando from the community to switch to alternatives to Docker, because Docker requires a license if you're using it for professional purposes. Like for business, for commercial, I should say. Yeah. So one of the drives was like, is the company that I work now currently is Acquia, and there was an email sent at the beginning of the year. Acquia even has a plugin or extension specifically
Can I
for
just clarify, Greg? I think you mentioned before, is it specifically Docker Desktop, not
Docker Desktop. Yes, exactly.
not the actual thing that runs in the command line.
Yeah. So there was requests for alternatives. Colima comes to mind now, but there's more that came up. But that was the oldest request. Colima was the first sort of like alternative that popped in the scene. And I was aware, and I subscribed to that GitHub issue, but it was there for a few years. And then there was an article at the beginning of this year that compared all the alternatives, and I ended up with Rancher Desktop after all. But it wasn't a problem specifically for the company that I work for because there was provision. So there would be an email that would be sent across the company at the beginning of the year and would purchase licenses. But in the effort to support more completely open source and free, because I would have to say that I maybe used it like once or twice for the purposes of day work. I mostly use it for open source things like BackdropCMS. So that was the main drive for me, that the fact that DDev supported all these alternatives, and that's why I started to try it at the beginning with. So yeah, that's it.
Well, I can reinforce that I did not leave Lando because of any dissatisfaction with Lando. It was working fine for me. It's just, it was more about working with other people using DDev and the kind of direction that DDev is going. So.
In fact, there is a mild annoyance, a single mild annoyance when I moved to DDev is that, or convenience, I should say, that Lando had before, is that if I started my scripts that provision locally things that I want to work with, and Lando detected that Docker is not running, it would start it for me and it wouldn't complain. Whereas DDev, when you start it, it just stops and gives up and says, no Docker, instance running, and you have to manually sort of like start it. But yeah, that's it. That's it for me. We'll be back.
Well, in my case, Lando tries to start Docker and fails. So I don't know if that's better.
Fair enough.
I think so. Most of us are probably familiar with these tools, but it would be because this is a recording, there may be some beginners out there. We should clarify what exactly DDev is and all of these. Wilbur, is that something you feel like you can give a good answer to? Is sort of that really basic, what
Sure.
is DDev? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so DDev is a set of tools that allows us to work with Docker containers. And it organizes that process and gives us commands that we can use with DDev to put together and run virtual environments on our machines. So there's Docker is sort of the technology that this is based on, and that's virtualization of containers. So the parts of our working full stack that we use to create an instance of our website running, PHP, MySQL, or the database version, it puts all those things together for us into a package and makes it relatively easy to get a local instance of a website up and running. And so the terms we talked about today, DDev, Doxel, and Lando, are doing the same kind of job. And they're let's say an installation that lets us work with Docker files. There's some differences between them, and in the past, those three were pretty much equally footed and had different players that were sort of promoting them and sponsoring them. I think what's given DDev really a big leg up in the last year is that they have Randy Fay he's paid to take care of DDev. And he's really expanded the reach of DDev so that it's used in all kinds of PHP applications. Django, Ruby, there's just a whole, if you go to their DDev website, Tim, maybe you can show them that, but there's recipes for starting all kinds of projects, and those are all completely built up and ready to go. So it makes it very easy for somebody who's not familiar with Docker, not even familiar with DDev, to pick up DDev and set up a working instance of a website using DDev as the sort of the tool that puts all that glue together. If you go to their getting started page, you'll see that there's all kinds of platforms that are supported, and each one of those has a recipe for spinning up that project. And all of that is included in the DDev sort of environment. This stuff is ready to go. So
yeah, I think what I was looking at now is the DDev site. They have, one of the things about DDev, they do have pretty good documentation. And I think, Wilbur, maybe what you were thinking of is, I think it's on here.
that's installation of DDev itself.
Right, but somewhere here, they do list like all the different.
Yep, CMS quick starts on the left-hand side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. On the right side there, you can see all the different things they support.
And it's nice that they've sorted it by project importance. No, just kidding. Backdrop shows up at the very top of the list there. So,
yeah.
And you can see that right now we're using a curl command that gets the backdrop instance, puts it into the project, and then starts running the project.
Sure.
Okay.
I use get clone
Yep.
because I pulled down the dev branch, but this would also, yep.
And if you look at that tag, then you'll see existing sites.
Mhm.
So one thing that I'm working on right now is a plugin that would install the B contrib module that gives us our CLI. That would be part of those instructions, so that there would be a plugin, and you'd say, "Oh,
Mhm.
do this, and then install this plugin," and now you'll have a running copy of B. I don't know. I don't use DDev. I'm just kind of getting started on it. I've been using it a lot for some contrib work I've been doing with Drupal, but one of the things that I really like about it compared to Doxel, and I can't speak for Lando, is that when you install DDev, it automatically creates a certificate for you, and you're going to be using an HTTPS connection on your local machine.
Sure.
So it's one of those things we add when we are working on Doxel if we need that, but it comes out of the package with DDev.
Yeah, Lando does that as well.
Yeah. They do it as well.
Yeah, so I think that with Lando, you have to do something with your browser or your operating system to trust the certificate once.
Yeah.
But that's it. Once you've done that, and I think there's even a command that you run, and that's it. But then it would be a one-off thing. You just run a command or do a single thing, and then every instance that you spin up is authenticated, so you don't get that annoyance when you start your local site that it says that the connection is not secure and so on.
Yep. Another thing that is really nice about this project is its coverage, in that if you're on Mac OS, Linux, Windows, it works all across those. And that's really the biggest advantage of these applications, is that if you have a team of developers working on a project, or even two people working on a project, you can give the project to somebody else and say, hey, just go into the project, spin up the DDev project, and you'll have a working instance of the project, and we can work on it and contribute it together. And that they'll see exactly what you'll see, because your local environment will match exactly what they're working on, which should match actually what's on the server, so that now you can develop things and know exactly what's happening. And I know that with DDev and Doxel, is that they keep their own configuration files. You can commit those to the project. They're just the sort of script part of it. And that's very small and out of the way. And so you could have DDev and Doxel running on the same project. Maybe not running at the same time, but running on your local machine. You could start one and close the other one and run it that way. So
it seems worth pointing out that like with people that are using Lando and DDev have reported problems with them running at the same time as well.
Yep.
And so you have to be sure, if you've started a Lando site and then you go to start a DDev site, it probably won't work. So you have to shut down all your Lando sites and start your DDev sites.
Yeah, it's mostly a problem with the networking. So basically they all of these, and I don't think it's exclusively between Lando and DDev. Any sort of like I don't know what you call them, orchestration tools around Docker would try to claim the ports and the services that run your local servers. So that's they're either going to crash the previous one and claim it for themselves, the one that you started last, or they're just going to give up because the service is going to be taken. Most likely that's what's going to happen. So yeah.
Yep, that's right. That's usually what happens. And
so basically these things are alternatives. Like you cannot run them, all of them in parallel, but you can sort of like have them installed on your computer and sequentially sort of like stop one and run the other, and you effectively do the same thing. You accomplish the same task using a different tool, so to say. Yeah. I think it's possible to run them at the same time if you're willing to fuss with port numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
only one of them can claim port 80. So if you want to get to your websites without using any port numbers, I think you're going to run into difficulties. But if you're willing to put a colon something after the domain name, you can run them at the same time.
Sure. Doesn't surprise me that you can do it, but to me, it's easier to just shut down the others. And so, and again, I've almost entirely quit using Lando now, so that's no longer a problem for me.
I can say this from my own experience with that is that I run into the same issue that you run into conflicts with two different schema, let's say DDev or Doxel or Lando, but within those projects, they make provisions that you can run multiple projects using that technology. So you could run two DDev instances on your machine at the same time. So
I'm going to put a link to this in the document. There was a session specifically on moving from Lando to DDev that was at MidCamp this year, and both Justin and I were at the session. It was very timely for me, but it actually didn't answer the main question I had. But during the unconference portion of the session later that day, I sat down with the presenter and worked through some of my questions. But this might be worth it if you really want to understand. And the presenter here wasn't like trying to tell people they should move from Lando to DDev, but he's been running into more people doing that. And the intent of the session was to sort of help Lando users understand the difference. Again, it was a lot of power stuff that didn't really interest me, or that I didn't understand a lot. But if you want to go deeper into this is a good session, moving from Lando to DDev. And there's a link to that YouTube.
I'll provide a link to an article as well that compares the Colima Docker desktop and Rancher desktop, the alternatives of the underlying technologies that these tools are based on.
Okay. I do have links here too. There is there is a blog post on the Backdrop blog that's a little bit dated, although I think the process is pretty much the same. One of us should kind of look through this and see if things have changed much, because this is like the primary documentation we have for getting started, and if this is dated, we should update it. But Rick Manellas, I forget how to pronounce his name, he wrote this for us a few years ago, back in 2018. And then just, I think, anytime I've had questions about DDev, I just go to their DDev docs, and it's pretty, getting started with DDev, I found their instructions to be quite good. They have a page, first of all, to just help you get started with Docker, because you first have to install Docker. Once you've installed Docker, then you can install DDev, which went pretty smoothly for me. Unfortunately, once I've installed it, it's not easy to reinstall it for sort of demo purposes. So I think we're going to have people, and my experience with installing stuff at this level is that it depends a lot on your specific circumstance. So trying to, they have different instructions for Linux, Mac, Windows, etc. And then once you've got started there, then it's really about, just learning some of the basic commands. And if you want to customize it, there's a few things. It's not that hard. One of the big obstacles that some people have faced in using any of these tools is that they're all command line based. And if you're I don't even know if I want to use the term beginners, but there are folks that are still that use Drupal or Backdrop because not so much Drupal anymore. Used to be the case with Drupal, but use Backdrop and would rather not use the command line because they're just not comfortable with it. And there are tools like MAMP or used to be Acquia Dev Desktop. I don't know if that's even still around. Those were the previous, before a lot of us used DDev or Docker tools. We used things like MAMP or WAMP or LAMP, which is just all the same thing except Windows, Mac, or Linux. And they were just tools to help you set up Apache, PHP projects on your local site, and they had some people still. I know a couple people in our community that still use MAMP primarily because of that UI that it provides.
I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the next step for these tools to provide a UI GUI version, like some graphical interface, like an abstraction over the command line to make it easier for these users. But yeah.
Back in 2020, I think it was, at MidCamp, they did a virtual MidCamp, and Randy Fay gave a like 3-hour advanced, well, he called it advanced DDev session for Drupal. And I was watching part of it last night, and he mentioned that is something, a few years ago was on his roadmap that, as far as I know, they still haven't accomplished.
I think it's hard. There's been a couple of attempts at it that I've watched along the way. Kalamuna had something called Calabox that was basically a GUI on top of an early version. Lando started out as Calabox, I think.
Right, I think so too. Yeah,
and there was a GUI that kind of worked there, and then Pantheon had kind of sub-licensed that and was using it to try to do a similar thing, and that fell by the wayside. So I think it's hard.
Yeah. But if you're watching this and you don't use the command line much, but you're interested in these kinds of tools, I can assure you, you don't have to learn a lot about the command line to use them. You will need to learn some, and to be honest, once you start using the command line, you'll probably appreciate it. But I totally understand. I was very reluctant back when I started in Drupal. The command line seemed very intimidating to me, and it took me a while, but now I use it all the time.
Chances are that if so, the first command line tool that people are going to face is going to be Drush or B for Drupal and Backdrop, right? So if you start dipping your toes into these command lines, you will eventually need to have the underlying technologies that are required in order to interact with either Drupal or Backdrop a little bit faster than the admin interface. So once you start dipping your toes there, I think that it becomes sort of like a natural evolution towards these tools that we are talking about today, Lando, DDev, and Doxel, etc.
For somebody wondering whether or not this is for them, I would argue that if you're working on one, like you're just managing your own site or a company site, and you haven't used the command line to do it, I could see where it might not seem like it's worth it. Where it definitely pays off, though, is if you're working on a lot, in my opinion, is if you're working on a lot of sites and you're sort of continually spinning up sites. I'm creating, new backdrop sites to test things out, on an almost daily basis. And once you're doing that, it so pays off to have these kinds of tools, and it's so much worth it. But if you're like spinning up one local backdrop site and then just working on it, and you've got it working already, this might not seem like it's worth it, and that's really up to you, I guess. But
yeah, another target audience would be contributors, because they don't necessarily spin up many sites, actual sites on their local, but it would be beneficial if they would start disposable instances of websites testing either Backdrop Core or Drupal or any of the contributed modules in either of the communities. And we have abstracted that for the majority. Like, you don't necessarily need to use these tools, because we have another technology with the code changes that we provide that spins up sandboxes on the internet. You don't have to do anything on your computer. But if you start writing code and contributing back instead of just testing or doing this the simple things that would be the initial step to contributions, then you might also eventually start feeling the need for something like this.
There's another use case where it comes in handy, even if you're not going to get deeply into it. There's kind of guided scripts that you run into every so often or on the internet. For example, the Starshot Drupal project that was released 2 weeks ago has a little one-line script that if you have DDev You type in the script and it downloads it, populates a database, and fires it up, and it's really convenient. And you can access that without actually knowing how to create these DDev scripts, without having to go to that extra level. If you get to the point where you have them installed, then you can run scripts if the instructions are good and the scripts are solid. So I mean that's a potential upside that's not too much of a lift.
Right. The other really obvious, but I don't think we've mentioned it, use case is if you're working in a larger shop, a team with lots of sites that potentially have different requirements, or you've got Drupal 7, Drupal 9, Drupal 10 sites, and some of them are using different versions of PHP, or they're on different servers.
Use different database engines.
Yeah, different database engines, is that you're able for each project to specify, which version of Apache or Nginx you want to use, which version of PHP, which version of MySQL or MariaDB that you want to use. And you can, literally go from one site to another and change those requirements, and also share that requirement document with your other members of your team so that everybody on your team is running with the exact same specifications. And it's quite easy to do. And also things like PHP MyAdmin or Mailhog. You can add things like these to your development environment quite easily, which we can talk about in a minute. So something I never do, I think we should just go ahead and spin up a DDev site, and I'm thinking, or a backdrop site using DDev. I can just copy and paste all these commands at once, can I? I usually do them one at a time. But if I just paste this all into the command line, it's going to work, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably going to complain because you need the end sign at the end to execute those commands sequentially. You need to wait for one to finish and then the next.
Let's try it.
Maybe, yeah, let's try it. But I think it's probably gonna maybe.
It looks like it's definitely working. So, does Wilbur or anybody? I've been seeing this message lately, and I started to look up. It doesn't seem to be prevent. It says that I'm out of space in my Docker containers, but it's still letting me spin up new ones. Does anybody know what that is?
You'll hit that actual wall pretty soon. I discovered. I've spent much of this week actually, deleting, because I've got dozens and dozens of Docker sites, which is just because I don't clean things up. And I've started having to use destroy them in order to clean up the space. But really, I'd like to know just how to, what configuration command to change to just give myself more space.
Okay, well, anyways, using those commands, I copied and pasted them all at once. Basically, we should break down quickly what they do. This first one just creates a directory. That's all it does. It creates a directory, moves you into that directory. The next command basically downloads Backdrop into that directory. The next one just unzips Backdrop. So up until here, all you're doing is downloading Backdrop into your directory. That's the first three commands. Once you've done those three, then you have to run DDev config, and you could just run DDev config, and it will ask you a couple of questions: what the name of your project is, what type of project it is, Backdrop, and what the doc root is. So you can change that. This is just sort of using default. Once you've done that, then you just say DDev start and DDev launch, and you get a site. And it went ahead and spun up a site right here, and I can go through the installation process. And there are ways around having to do even this, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. So there we go. I mean, so once I've got Docker and DDev installed, I just have to run those commands, and boom, I have a local backdrop site. I can log in. I can, do whatever I want. I can install modules and themes through the UI into this site, no problem.
So Tim, go to the reports page. Yeah.
Sure. Status report or what? What did you want to see?
Well, then we can see that, it's installed the latest version of Backdrop.
Sure.
It's running PHP 8.2. It's running Nginx server. And does it have the MySQL 10 point
Should somewhere, yeah.
up? Yeah.
Yeah,
We'll look-
at the top.
Oh, yeah,
At the top.
up here. Well,
Yep.
let's change PHP versions. It's just a sample to show how easy that is, right?
Yep.
I think that's a worthwhile thing to do. I have two folders here. This one, user group. So on the left side, I have, I'm using Sublime Text just to edit, and I have all my DDev sites opening up here, and we can go through. So one of the differences, actually, since I have this open, I'm going to show this. One of the differences between Lando and DDev that scared me at first is that when you install a Lando site, and I have one on the right side here, the only file, you just add a lando.yaml file, and it has all your configuration in it. And that's the only thing that you sort of see there. And so you can set things like what database you want to use, which version of PHP. You could add, add things like B using this file, create some custom commands. This is all done right in this.
Should
this
just
one.
be said that with Lando, B's in the latest version, B's now included by default.
Okay.
Yeah, for both of these tools have a thing that is called a recipe or something like that, or
Yeah.
the type of project that you want to spin. And previously, when Tim was showing the commands that he was running, where you specified the type of installation being Backdrop, when you specify Drupal, for example, in DDev as well, you get Drush, which is the equivalent of B out of the box. We are working with DDev now to get that as out of the box with the Backdrop recipe, so to say, or I'm not sure if it's called recipe. Is it called recipe? I think it is. So anyway, ideally specifying just the type being Backdrop would eventually get you B as well. We're working on that.
Yes, and I can show you how, or at least where to find instructions on how to add B until then. But anyway, so one of the big differences is just that the Backdrop has this one file, whereas when you go to DDev, it adds this entire directory. And in the directory, there's a config.yaml file, which is kind of the equivalent, but it doesn't do everything that the lando.yaml file did. It does some of it. It lets you set a lot of things. For example, we can change our PHP version. Why don't we switch to a 7x version? What can somebody recommend a 7x version?
Why don't you go
4?
Yep.
7.4?
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's try that. We'll just save this. And one of the things you have to do then, anytime you make a change to that file, I think you have to restart. Is that correct?
Yes.
So then I just hit DDev restart in my project folder, and it's basically just going to reload this project with whatever changes I've made.
If you've never installed something in that version with DDev, it's going to pull the images as well, so that it can, yeah.
So what basically another way of saying that, right, is the first time you use PHP 7.4, DDev will have to download and install that, right? But once you've done it once, then it can reuse it for other projects. So now if I go back to this site and I reload, I expect to see that we're now using the PHP 7.4, right?
Right.
There we go. So we could do the same thing with our database versions or other things.
Yeah. You
So
can
it
switch
seems
server to Apache instead of Nginx and so on. Yeah.
right. It seems like, well, certainly DDev seems to default to Nginx, which works fine for me because that's all of we use Nginx in all our servers. It surprises me a bit though, because I think Apache is more common, isn't it?
Yeah. One thing that I think
so much anymore.
well, if you go to a telemetry page, you will get a sense of how many people are using Apache versus Nginx. But one thing that comes out of the box with both Drupal and Backdrop is a .htaccess file that handles certain things. Nginx doesn't support that file, so yeah.
Okay.
It is a consideration sometimes. I'm not sure if it's a factor for choosing one over the other, but yeah.
Well, the time is going quicker than than I hoped. So we don't have much time left. I think I'd like to show just a couple of quick commands. And Wilbur, please jump in. I know if there's something you think is important. And if people have questions, get them ready. But a couple of other commands like DDev describe is an important one. And it's really helpful because you can see what path you can access your site, what the username and password is for the database, for the web, things like that.
Yeah, now since you have it there, we should
Mhm.
also note that these tools, for example, here you can see the mail pit thing.
Right.
Another thing that you may want to use these local environments for is that if, for example, you have some trouble with your site being able to send emails or not, or you want to customize the emails, but before you do that, you want to test it locally, mail pit, or I can't remember now the alternative being used by Lando, the default.
Mailhog.
Sorry?
Mailhog.
Yeah.
Mailhog, exactly. So you can use those things, or PHP myadmin, sort of like you can, in the configuration file that Tim was showing before, you can specify if you want these to run or not. And then it can help, these things can help you troubleshoot email
Right.
sending from your site, or if you want to do direct edits or view what the database holds in a graphical interface. So these things can help as well.
Right. So basically, if you're like testing the registration emails on your site, you can test that, and the email will go to a mail pit, which is accessible at this URL. So I just cut and pasted that, and that takes me into this custom installation of mail pit, which is just for this project. And any outgoing emails from the site will show up here, and I can interact with them.
Yeah.
And the site here. Very handy. This you could do the same thing in Lando, but I think you had to add it. It wasn't in the default install.
Yeah, it wasn't in the
Right.
default, but
But
yeah, I think that
DDev has it in the default install.
yeah, we should clarify that what this does is that if you try to send an email from the local site that you have, it intercepts the email. So if you try to send it to a person, it will not go to that person. It will intercept it and just keep it locally. So you
Right.
can set test emails that will mimic the actual real thing that should happen.
So I'm just going to show a couple of other quick commands. DDev list will show you all your DDev containers. It does pause them if you don't use them for a little while. So that's, and then the ones that I haven't used since I last booted are just stopped. But I can restart any of those. DDev describe, DDev list, and DDev delete would delete this instance. I have a bunch of common commands here. You just DDev import database is a really easy way to get databases in. If you want to do, so I get the feeling that there's a better way to do this, but if you're used to using php myadmin, you can go back here and just run this command. Hit return. It adds, now I have to do DDev restart.
That's
That will
great.
just-
I've
that will just
added
take-
that numerous times, but well, I guess I've gotten pretty good at adding it. You know, I've learned what the Lando configurations are for that, but it's
Right.
nice that it's at the command line like that.
Yes, I think in Lando, I think you had to add it to the lando.yaml file, which is not difficult, but it's slightly different.
Well,
Okay.
So now-
it's not difficult if you know exactly the syntax to use,
Yes.
right? You know, it's whereas with DDev here, you know,
Right.
kind of usability, you can say DDev help, and it offers it as an option.
Yeah.
Same with configuring Xdebug,
Okay.
another tricky
So
thing
I
to
just
do.
did DDev describe again, and now we can see here's the link to my PHP myadmin copy link. And this should take us directly into PHP myadmin again, specifically for this site, and I can get in to the database and check out tables and things directly. I want to do one or two more things quick. Should let me show for our particular audience, for people doing core development, this is one of the revolutionary things for me that's happened fairly recently is Greg shared a script. So I've been for a long time spinning up just raw backdrop sites using the dev branch of backdrop. And Greg keeps talking about how he can spin up specific PRs. And you can see I have a bunch of these sites that are set up with specific core PRs. And he shared, and this is not a DDev feature per se, as it is just a script that uses DDev and a specific clone, get clone command that copies down a version of backdrop with a specific PR in it. So when I go to, if I change directories here, CD, just sharing this is just another way to use, again, not, you could do the same thing with Lando or Doxel. This is not DDev specific, but it's really nice. DDev backdrop, and then CD backdrop. And then I have a script, a bash script that I can run. It's called new drop site. And this is a lot of the work stolen from Greg's, but Greg is like a power user.
No.
Your script is like really deep, Greg.
Yeah, if anyone wants, so I had the same script for Lando. It's not specific to DDev. I just when I switched to DDev, I switched my scripts, but I kept the Lando versions as well. If anyone's interested, start a thread in our chat in Zulip, and I'll provide the script. It's horrific because there's a lot of craft in it, and comments. But I'm sure that you can sort of like pull the bits that you want out of it and eventually get you started. But yeah.
So a couple of things I stole from Greg's script and made a simpler version, which I would also be willing to share, is it just asks 3 questions. One, do I want to run the install process, which is basically, do I want this DDev site do I want to manually do the install process in case I'm testing that, in which case I would say no. But if I wanted to, if I'm just testing something on a live site, I don't want to have to run through the install process. So I say, yes, run the install process. And then it says, do you want to apply a PR? And if I say yes, I type the PR. And then I just type the PR number, and it automatically spins up a site with that PR applied. And it's very, very handy. And it's even more handy now because our PR sandboxes are becoming dysfunctional faster than they used to. Used to be that they had a longer shelf life. And now if I find a PR that's like a month old, it probably won't work in the sandbox. So I can just spin, but oftentimes it will if I spin it up this way. So I can test PRs. We are almost out of time. I think the one other thing, and if anybody has questions, jump in. The other thing I want to stress that was important to me was the ability to create custom commands. And because I did some research on this and sort of figured it out, I'll at least show it quick. And it's a difference in Lando to B. In Lando, on the right side, you'll see here in the .yaml file, you could create these special, under tooling, these special B commands, or just special commands. I have B, drush, snapshot, reset. These were things Peter, our old friend BW Panda, Peter shared a lot of this with me. And I think that's a little bit what inspired Greg in his script. But this just runs a series of commands to do things like create a snapshot. Now, DDev comes with its own snapshot command, which is actually pretty powerful. But for some specific reasons, I needed to create my own snapshot command, basically because I needed to include config files in my snapshot, and my config files are outside of the files directory. So I needed a special command. And the way to do this in DDev is a little bit different. In DDev, you have on this other side, we have the DDev directory. And if you go to the commands directory, it's got these are different places that you can run custom commands. So if you want to create a database custom command, you just create a file here. My reset and snap is like snapshot and reset. They're here. And basically you just create a file in this host directory, and then you can, basically it's a little bash script that's inside this. But now when I run DDev snap, that will appear here. Something I just learned last night is that there is also, I don't want to go there, there is a DDev in my home directory that looks the same, that is universal. So I have been like recreating every one of these sites. I've recreated the custom commands in my script. My script automatically does it, so it's not a problem. But these same scripts are sort of regenerated each time, and I've learned now that I can just do this once in my global directory.
Oh, yeah.
And
There
then
is a
I don't
slight
have to
difference.
create them for each project. Go ahead.
There is a slight difference. That assumes that the script that you want to run in your global command applies to all the types of sites that you spin up. So the global commands are there for things that are CMS agnostic. So if the scripts that you want to run are made to run for both Drupal and WordPress, and that you put them in the global,
Right.
Otherwise, you have to sort of like do it specifically for per projects.
Well, I
Yeah.
could put a BDev snapshot.
Fair
A
enough.
backdrop snapshot is global, but it would only work, you're right, on backdrop sites.
Yeah.
I will point out, because I ran into this problem, that one of the lessons I learned at MidCamp, and actually I had to, the presenter for the session was not aware of this. We had to talk to some other people and figure it out, was I had created my reset and snapshot commands in the web directory, and they seemed to work, except that I couldn't run other DDev commands within those scripts. And it turned out that in order to run DDev commands within a DDev command, you have to create the command at the host level. And if you do, then it works. So if anybody has tried that, I should shut up. And I'm sorry, Wilbur, did you want to add anything? Does anybody have any questions?
You did great, Tim.
Well, I did. I was worried that you might not be available or nobody else would, so I prepared a little bit last night. Learned some new things. Go ahead.
One thing that we might want to adapt in the scripts is that the newly released Backdrop version now supports installing with the default being the configuration, not the default. You can configure the configuration to be the active configuration to be saved in the database.
Right.
And you saying that you need a separate script for the active configuration to be backed up as files triggered this, that you might want to add another option that says you want to install the active configuration in the database as an option. We didn't have a lot of use cases now, but I imagine along the run, there might be, pull requests that specifically test things around that. So.
Okay. Well, I feel like this was a fairly good beginner thing. I will put in my notes that we don't have time to go into it, but I have a link for, I'm working on domain access right now. And one of the tricks was, okay, if I create a site and I need to access it through multiple domains, so I basically want multiple domains to point to the same site, how do I do that? And I've created instructions. Well, basically, I just point to instructions on how to do that. But it's on the domain module, there's in the wiki, there's a link to these DDev instructions, which show you how to add additional domain names. So you just edit the DDev YAML file, and you can add extra domains, and it will spin them up, and they'll all point at the same database and same code base. That's one thing. There are instructions. Nate put some instructions on adding B to DDev prior to the work that Wilbur's doing. So if you're trying to add B and you don't know how, here's a link to the instructions that I've been using. I would assume that there might be a recipe out there for like DDev and CiviCRM. And if anybody knows, if anybody's using DDev with CiviCRM, like maybe we should put a link to some instructions for that.
Yeah. And maybe another thing to consider is how to spin up instances that have more than one database. You have use cases where you're doing Drupal migrations or Drupal to Backdrop upgrades that you might want to have multiple database server instances in a single.
Or you might be testing Backdrop with multi-sites.
Or multi-sites, yes, yeah.
Yeah, there are some other unique use cases like that. And, maybe we should have a page like this, a wiki page or a documentation or a blog post that is more up to date and lists some of the other specific use cases and at least links to where you can get information. One of the other things that I love about having DDev here is the ability, I have not I went for probably a couple years without spinning up a local Drupal 10 site, just because I didn't remember how to do it and it was a hassle. And it's really quite easy with Backdrop or with DDev. I can just run this series of commands and I have a local working Drupal site. And the same thing yesterday with WordPress. It's like, okay, there's times I'd love to go to do a quick WordPress dev site, but I just don't remember how to do it, and I'm too lazy to figure out how. Well, I just Googled yesterday, found the steps. I just run this series of steps and I have a working WordPress site. And the main reason I would do that is just for comparison. I want to see how WordPress does something differently from Backdrop. And it's that simple. So I included those, again, I just cut and paste these instructions from other sources, but they'll work for you so you can spin up, Backdrop, Drupal, and WordPress. And there's, if you want to do Joomla, I think there's instructions for that out there. You just have to find them. Anybody have final questions?
Sorry. No, real quick. I've added 2 links in the chat for the comparison between Colima and the different providers. Maybe you want to add it to those links to the document.
Sure.
So, yeah. Okay, that's it.
Okay. I will stop sharing now, unless anybody has any questions.
I think it's time. We're 5 minutes over.
For me, as well as the sort of barrier of trying to move all my sort of workflow to it, there's a major barrier in that I'm the maintainer of B, and that's quite heavily set up with tests and integrate that also run in the GitHub action all around Lando. So if I was to try and switch, it's more than just what I'm doing. I would have to switch a lot of what B does in order to do that. So it's interesting how different things work, but I think it would still be a very big challenge to try and shift B to do to be able to do that.
Sure, but just for those who aren't aware, so once I added B to my sites, I think it's worth pointing out that here's a site I use all the time for testing Dockroot, is that now when you want to run B, I just run to DDev B and then the B command.
Yeah.
Lando works similarly. Oops.
It is just about the
yes.
The development and testing of B.
Right. Yeah, I understand that that's what you were talking about, Martin, but it just occurred to me that I should show how easy it is to use B if we're just as a user, right? So I can just run a B command. I can run, DDev B ULI. There we go, and it's provided a login link for me to the site. So that's how you actually use B once it's installed, but that doesn't address Martin's concern. That did make me think of one other thing, but I forgot. So, in terms of the switchover, I can tell you, because you did raise that question, Martin, that I have in my DDev directory, oh no, it wouldn't be there, experiments here. So I felt like at first that I needed to reset up each project for DDev. Because in the right directory here, I have this experiments. These are all old Lando projects. But I have since then realized it's not that hard. Like in terms of, again, your use case is different. But if you just have a Lando site and you want to then run it in DDev, really all you have to do is go into the Dockroot and run DDev config and run through the install script, and it runs. So you don't actually have to move the site or anything. And if I don't delete the Lando file, I'm going to have both the Lando and the DDev here, but that doesn't hurt anything either. But if I'm done with the Lando file, I can delete it. But really, it's switching from just running simple sites. The transition is not difficult. You just have to sort of give it a try. Any other questions? It's 10 after the hour, so we're 10 minutes over. We should probably wrap.
Yeah, we should switch to the dev meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd hoped we'd get to more, but I hope this has been useful to people. I think it'll be nice to have this recorded for other people who are interested in getting started.
Yeah, let's stop the recording and go into the
Yeah.
dev meeting.
I'm working
Alright,
on that.
thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks for the user group meeting. Darn it.